The Crusades were a series of religious wars that took place between the years 1095 and 1291. These wars were fought mainly between Christian and Muslim forces over control of a region known as the Holy Land. The Holy Land included important cities such as Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth. These places were deeply important to both Christians and Muslims, as well as to Jews. For Christians, Jerusalem was the place where Jesus Christ had lived, taught, and been crucified. For Muslims, Jerusalem was also sacred because it was home to important religious sites connected to the Prophet Muhammad. To understand why the Crusades began, it is important to understand the political and religious situation of the time. During the early Middle Ages, much of Europe was divided into small kingdoms. Most people in Europe were Christians and followed the authority of the Church. The Church was led by the Pope, who lived in Rome. The Pope was not only a religious leader, but also a powerful political figure. His influence extended across many kingdoms. At the same time, much of the Middle East was controlled by Muslim rulers. Islam had spread rapidly after the 7th century. Muslim empires had grown to include large regions of North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Jerusalem had been under Muslim control for many centuries before the Crusades began. During much of this time, Christian pilgrims were allowed to visit the city peacefully. However, conditions began to change during the 11th century. A group known as the Seljuk Turks, who were Muslims from Central Asia, began expanding their territory. They took control of large parts of the Middle East, including Jerusalem. They also defeated the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. The Byzantine Empire was a Christian empire centered in Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. This empire had existed for centuries and was one of the most powerful states in the region. The defeat at Manzikert weakened the Byzantine Empire greatly. It lost large areas of land and faced continued threat from the Seljuk Turks. The Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I, realized that his empire needed help to survive. He sent a request to the Pope in Western Europe, asking for military assistance. In Western Europe, Pope Urban II saw this request as an opportunity. He believed that helping the Byzantine Empire could strengthen Christianity. He also believed that capturing Jerusalem from Muslim control would be a great religious achievement. In November 1095, the Pope held an important meeting known as the Council of Clermont in France. At this meeting, Pope Urban II gave a powerful speech. He called on Christian knights and soldiers to take up arms and travel to the Holy Land. He urged them to help fellow Christians in the East and to reclaim Jerusalem. He promised that those who joined the crusade would receive forgiveness for their sins. This promise was deeply meaningful to people who believed strongly in their religion. Many people responded to the Pope's call. Knights saw the crusade as a chance for honor, adventure, and religious devotion. Some hoped to gain land and wealth. Others believed they were serving God. Ordinary people also joined, including farmers and laborers. They left their homes and families behind to travel long distances. The journey to the Holy Land was long and difficult. Crusaders had to travel thousands of kilometers across Europe and into Asia. They faced hunger, disease, and harsh weather. Many died before reaching their destination. One of the earliest groups to leave was known as the People's Crusade. This group was made mostly of ordinary people rather than trained soldiers. They were led by a preacher named Peter the Hermit. However, this group was poorly organized and lacked military experience. As they traveled through foreign lands, they faced hostility and shortages of food. When they reached areas controlled by Muslim forces, they were quickly defeated. The main Crusader army was better prepared. It included trained knights and experienced leaders from different parts of Europe. They traveled through the Byzantine Empire and reached the Middle East in 1097. With support from Byzantine forces, they began capturing cities controlled by Muslim rulers. One of their first major successes was the capture of the city of Nicaea in 1097. This victory helped restore some territory to the Byzantine Empire. The Crusaders then moved deeper into the region. They faced difficult battles and suffered heavy losses, but they continued advancing. In 1098, the Crusaders captured the important city of Antioch after a long and difficult siege. The siege lasted several months. Soldiers faced starvation and disease. Many died during the effort. However, after capturing the city, the Crusaders themselves were surrounded by a Muslim army. Despite their weakened condition, they managed to defend the city and survive. Finally, in June 1099, the Crusaders reached Jerusalem. The city was heavily defended. The Crusaders began a siege, surrounding the city and cutting off supplies. After several weeks, they launched a final attack in July 1099. They succeeded in breaking through the defenses and captured Jerusalem. The capture of Jerusalem was a major turning point. However, it was also marked by violence. Many of the city's Muslim and Jewish inhabitants were killed. This event created deep anger and resentment that would last for generations. After capturing Jerusalem, the Crusaders established Christian states in the region. These included the Kingdom of Jerusalem and other smaller territories. European rulers governed these lands and built castles to defend them. However, Muslim leaders did not accept this loss. Over time, they began organizing efforts to reclaim their territory. This would lead to further crusades and continued conflict over the Holy Land. The Crusades had now begun, and they would continue for nearly 2 centuries, shaping the history of Europe and the Middle East in profound ways. After the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, they established several Christian states in the Holy Land. The most important of these was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Other Crusader states included the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. These territories were ruled by European Christian leaders who built castles and fortifications to protect their control. At first, the Crusaders were able to maintain their position. They received support from Europe in the form of soldiers, supplies, and money. Many knights traveled to the Holy Land to defend these new Christian territories. Military religious orders were also created. These included the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. These groups were made up of warrior monks who combined religious devotion with military service. They protected pilgrims, defended castles, and fought against Muslim forces. However, the Crusader states faced constant danger. They were far from Europe and surrounded by Muslim territories. Over time, Muslim leaders began to unite and organize resistance. One of the earliest major setbacks for the Crusaders came in 1144, when Muslim forces captured the city of Edessa. This was the first Crusader state to fall. The loss of Edessa shocked Europe. Christian leaders saw it as a serious threat to their presence in the Holy Land. In response, the Pope called for another crusade. This became known as the Second Crusade, which began in 1147. 2 important European kings joined this crusade. King Louis VII of France and King Conrad III of Germany led large armies toward the Holy Land. However, the crusade faced many problems from the beginning. The journey was long and difficult. Many soldiers died from hunger, disease, and attacks along the way. When the Crusaders finally reached the Middle East, they attempted to capture the city of Damascus in 1148. However, the attack failed. Muslim defenders successfully protected the city. The Crusaders were forced to retreat. The Second Crusade ended in failure and weakened Christian confidence. In the years that followed, Muslim forces grew stronger under new leadership. One of the most important Muslim leaders during this time was a man named Saladin. He was born in 1137 in what is now Iraq. Saladin became known for his intelligence, leadership, and strong religious faith. He gradually united Muslim territories in Egypt and Syria, creating a powerful and organized state. Saladin believed that Jerusalem should be under Muslim control. He carefully prepared his army and waited for the right moment to challenge the Crusaders. That moment came in 1187. In July 1187, Saladin faced the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin near the Sea of Galilee. This battle became one of the most important turning points in the Crusades. The Crusader army suffered from heat, thirst, and exhaustion. Saladin surrounded their forces and defeated them completely. Many Crusader knights were killed or captured. After this victory, Saladin moved quickly. He captured several Crusader cities. In October 1187, his army reached Jerusalem. Unlike the earlier Crusader capture of the city, Saladin's forces allowed many civilians to leave peacefully after the city surrendered. This event returned Jerusalem to Muslim control after nearly 90 years. The loss of Jerusalem shocked Christian Europe. The city had deep religious importance, and its capture by Muslim forces created fear and anger. In response, European leaders organized another major crusade. This became known as the Third Crusade, which began in 1189. This crusade was led by some of the most powerful rulers in Europe. These included King Richard I of England, who was known as Richard the Lionheart, King Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick I of the Holy Roman Empire. Frederick led a large army toward the Holy Land, but died in 1190 while crossing a river. His death weakened the Crusader effort. Philip and Richard continued the crusade by sea. King Richard became known for his military skill and leadership. He won several important battles against Saladin's forces. One of his most significant victories was at the Battle of Arsuf in 1191. This victory allowed Crusader forces to regain control of some coastal areas. Despite his victories, Richard was unable to capture Jerusalem. Both sides were strong, and neither could achieve complete victory. Eventually, Richard and Saladin agreed to a treaty in 1192. According to this agreement, Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed to visit the city safely. The Third Crusade ended without fully achieving its goal of recapturing Jerusalem, but allowed Christian presence to continue in parts of the region. In the years that followed, additional crusades were launched. However, these later crusades often faced serious problems. One of the most surprising and tragic events occurred during the Fourth Crusade, which began in 1202. Instead of traveling directly to the Holy Land, Crusader forces became involved in political conflicts. They were unable to pay for transportation and were persuaded to attack the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. This city was Christian, not Muslim. In 1204, Crusader forces captured and looted Constantinople. They destroyed buildings, stole valuable treasures, and caused great damage. This event shocked the Christian world. It weakened the Byzantine Empire and created deep divisions between Eastern and Western Christians. The Fourth Crusade never reached Jerusalem. Instead, it caused harm to fellow Christians and weakened one of the most important Christian empires. Over time, Muslim forces continued regaining territory. Crusader states became smaller and weaker. European support declined as interest and resources shifted elsewhere. The struggle for control of the Holy Land would continue, but the balance of power was gradually shifting, and the Crusader presence would eventually come to an end. By the early 1300s, the Crusader states in the Holy Land were weaker than ever before. After the failure of the Fourth Crusade to reach Jerusalem, many people in Europe began to lose confidence in the crusading movement. However, religious leaders and kings still hoped to restore Christian control over the sacred lands. One of the most unusual crusades during this time was the Sixth Crusade, which began in 1228. This crusade was led by Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire. Frederick was a highly educated ruler who spoke several languages and understood both Christian and Muslim cultures. Unlike earlier crusaders, Frederick did not rely entirely on military force. Instead, Frederick used diplomacy. He traveled to the Middle East and began negotiations with the Muslim ruler Sultan al-Kamil, who was the nephew of Saladin. Both leaders were interested in avoiding war. After months of discussion, they reached an agreement in 1229. According to this agreement, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth were returned to Christian control peacefully. Muslims were still allowed to live in the city and continue their religious practices. This peaceful transfer was very different from earlier violent conquests. It showed that diplomacy could sometimes achieve what armies could not. However, this peaceful control did not last long. Many Christians and Muslims did not trust the agreement. In 1244, Muslim forces regained control of Jerusalem. This marked another major loss for the Crusaders. During this period, new Muslim leaders emerged who were determined to remove Crusader presence completely. One of the most important groups was the Mamluks. The Mamluks were originally enslaved soldiers who rose to power in Egypt. They became skilled warriors and strong rulers. The Mamluk leader Sultan Baybars became one of the most effective opponents of the Crusaders. He ruled during the mid-1300s and led many successful campaigns. Baybars captured Crusader cities one by one. He used careful planning, strong armies, and knowledge of Crusader defenses. Baybars understood that Crusader power depended heavily on their coastal cities. These cities allowed Crusaders to receive supplies and reinforcements from Europe by sea. By capturing these ports, Baybars could isolate and weaken Crusader forces. He captured important cities such as Caesarea, Arsuf, and Antioch. The fall of Antioch in 1268 was especially significant. Antioch had been one of the first and most important Crusader states. Its loss marked a major turning point. After Baybars died, other Mamluk leaders continued his efforts. They slowly eliminated the remaining Crusader strongholds. Crusader forces were no longer able to receive enough support from Europe. European kings were facing their own problems at home, including political conflicts and economic challenges. The final and most important Crusader city was Acre. Acre was a large coastal city and served as the last major center of Crusader power. It was heavily fortified and defended by knights and soldiers from different parts of Europe. In 1291, Mamluk forces led by Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil launched a massive attack on Acre. The siege lasted several weeks. Both sides fought fiercely. Crusader defenders tried to hold their walls, while Mamluk forces used siege weapons and constant attacks. Despite their efforts, the Crusaders were overwhelmed. Mamluk forces broke through the defenses and captured the city. Many defenders were killed, and survivors fled by sea. The fall of Acre marked the end of Crusader rule in the Holy Land. After 1291, there were no major Crusader territories left in the region. Although later Crusades were proposed, none succeeded in regaining permanent control of Jerusalem or surrounding lands. The Crusades had lasted nearly 200 years. During this time, countless soldiers, civilians, and families had been affected. Many people had traveled far from their homes. Many had died in battles, from disease, or from the hardships of long journeys. The Crusades also changed both Europe and the Middle East in important ways. Trade between regions increased. European merchants became more connected with Middle Eastern markets. Goods such as spices, silk, and knowledge began to flow between cultures. European travelers learned about new ideas in science, medicine, and mathematics from Muslim scholars. This exchange of knowledge helped shape the future development of Europe. At the same time, the Crusades caused deep suffering. Cities were destroyed, and populations were displaced. Families were separated, and entire communities were affected by violence and loss. The Crusades also created long-lasting mistrust between Christians and Muslims. These memories remained part of historical identity for centuries. Even though the Crusades ended militarily in 1291, their effects continued to influence politics, religion, and relationships between regions long after the last battles had ended. After the fall of Acre in 1291, the Crusader presence in the Holy Land came to a complete end. For nearly 200 years, European Christian forces had tried to establish and defend their control over sacred lands far from their homes. Now, that effort was over. Muslim rulers, especially the Mamluks, firmly controlled Jerusalem and the surrounding regions. The surviving Crusaders fled mostly by sea. Many returned to Europe, carrying memories of war, loss, and long journeys. Some had spent most of their lives in the Holy Land. They had built homes, raised families, and lived in foreign lands for many years. Leaving behind everything they had known was painful and difficult. In Europe, news of the loss spread slowly. Many people felt sadness and disappointment. Jerusalem had been deeply important to Christians. For centuries, people had dreamed of protecting it. Now, those dreams had ended. However, over time, European leaders began to focus on other matters. Wars between European kingdoms became more important. Political power struggles, economic growth, and internal conflicts required attention. The Crusades gradually became part of history rather than an ongoing mission. Even though the Crusades ended, their effects were still felt across continents. One of the most important long-term effects was the increase in trade between Europe and the Middle East. Before the Crusades, Europe had been more isolated. Travel was limited and knowledge of distant lands was small. During the Crusades, thousands of Europeans traveled across unfamiliar regions. They saw new cities, new cultures, and new goods. Merchants began trading spices, silk, glass, perfumes, and other valuable items from the Middle East and Asia. These goods became highly desired in Europe. Cities such as Venice, Genoa, and Pisa in Italy became rich and powerful because of trade. Their ships transported soldiers during the Crusades and later carried goods between continents. Trade routes expanded across the Mediterranean Sea. This increase in trade helped European economies grow. Towns expanded into larger cities. Markets became more active. Wealth increased for merchants and traders. This economic growth helped shape the future development of Europe. The Crusades also helped spread knowledge. European travelers encountered advanced learning in Muslim lands. Muslim scholars had preserved and expanded knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome. They had made progress in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Europeans learned about new medical treatments, scientific ideas, and technologies. They brought this knowledge back home. Over time, this helped encourage learning and education. This exchange of ideas contributed to changes that would later lead to the Renaissance, a period of cultural and intellectual growth in Europe. However, the Crusades also caused deep human suffering. Many soldiers died far from home. Many civilians were killed or forced to flee. Entire cities were damaged or destroyed. Families were separated and lives were permanently changed. In the Middle East, people remembered the Crusaders as foreign invaders who had come from distant lands to conquer their homes. These memories became part of cultural history. Stories of resistance and defense were passed down through generations. In Europe, the Crusades were remembered as religious missions. Knights who had fought were often seen as brave and devoted. Their stories became part of European tradition. The Crusades also changed the role of the Church in Europe. At the beginning of the Crusades, the Pope had shown great power by calling thousands of people to war. This showed how strong religious authority was at the time. However, as Crusades failed or caused unexpected damage, such as the attack on Constantinople, people began to question leadership decisions. Over time, political kings and rulers began gaining more power compared to religious leaders. The Byzantine Empire, which had asked for help at the beginning of the Crusades, never fully recovered from the damage caused by the Fourth Crusade. The attack on Constantinople in 1204 weakened the empire severely. Although the Byzantines regained their city later, their strength was greatly reduced. In 1453, more than 150 years later, the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople. This marked the final end of the Byzantine Empire. In the Middle East, Muslim rulers remained in control of Jerusalem and surrounding lands. Over time, the Ottoman Empire became the dominant power in the region. They ruled Jerusalem for centuries. For ordinary people, life slowly returned to normal after the wars ended. Farmers returned to their fields. Merchants reopened their shops. Families rebuilt homes. Cities recovered gradually over many years. Pilgrims continued traveling to Jerusalem peacefully. Christians, Muslims, and Jews continued living in the region, each practicing their faith. The Crusades became part of history, but their memory remained strong. They had changed the direction of nations, strengthened trade between continents, and connected distant cultures in ways that had never happened before. The Crusades had begun with a call to protect sacred lands, but over time they became complex wars involving power, survival, belief, and human ambition. They left behind stories of courage, suffering, faith, and change. And as the centuries passed, the world that emerged after the Crusades was more connected, more aware, and forever shaped by those long and difficult journeys across deserts, seas, and unfamiliar lands.